All right, everybody, buckle up. Because today we are diving deep into the wild world of the 2024 presidential debates.
Oh, should be interesting.
You know it. It's September 17th. And we've got this stack of articles.
Right.
And we are going to use them to decode how these candidates are using, well, basically the power of language.
Right.
To try and win over voters.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like we've got these backstage passes
Yeah.
to their strategy playbook.
I like that, yeah.
And this is the kind of stuff I find it so fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Because, I mean, you're right. It's about more than just policy at the debates, right?
Oh, absolutely. It goes way beyond just the issues. It's about tapping into emotions.
Yeah.
Building trust.
Yes.
And ultimately persuading voters to see the world through their lens.
Exactly. And one thing that really jumped out at me right away from, just kind of the initial skim was how much one candidate seems to be leaning on this power of we.
Interesting.
It's almost like they're trying to build this sense of like shared purpose with the voters.
Yeah, it's a very common communication strategy and a classic one at that.
Really?
Yeah, the use of we can be so effective in creating this sense of unity.
Right.
And shared identity with voters, it sort of makes them feel like they're part of something larger than themselves.
It's very unifying.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, so let's break down this whole we strategy a little bit further.
Okay.
So I've got this academic paper.
All right.
It's 1.pdf, and it analyzes that recent Trump-Harris debate from September 10th.
Gotcha.
And they use text analysis software. Oh, wow. To like measure the psychological impact of their words.
That's why it's amazing what technology can tell us these days about human behavior. That kind of analysis is so fascinating to me because it goes way beyond just the surface level,
Yeah.
It can actually reveal underlying personality traits and subconscious motivations.
Okay, so what kind of patterns did they uncover? What did the software find?
Well, the findings were pretty revealing.
Okay.
It turns out that Trump, he leans very heavily on the word I.
Really?
Which is a strong indicator of individual agency, right?
Okay.
So he's focusing on his own actions, his own promises.
Right. Yeah.
Harris, on the other hand, uses we far more frequently.
Interesting.
Which kind of points to this emphasis on collective responsibility.
Okay.
Shared challenges.
So is that just like a stylistic quirk? Or does that actually reflect like their broader approaches to leadership, do you think?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Wow.
I mean, on the surface, it suggests a really fundamental difference in how they frame their campaigns.
Okay.
Trump's I centers his narrative very much on his past actions and his future promises,
Right.
which kind of positions him as the sole driver of change.
Right.
He is the one who's going to fix it.
He's the guy.
Exactly. Whereas Harris's we broadens that narrative to encompass shared challenges and solutions. Right. So it implies that change is much more of a collective effort.
It's a team effort.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, whether that translates into actual policy is a whole other story.
Right. Well, that's what we're here to unpack.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's like they're each telling a different story.
They are.
About what it means to be president. One is like this lone hero narrative.
Yes.
And the other one is much more about leading a team, like you said.
Precisely. And that's what I think makes this linguistic analysis so revealing.
Okay.
Because these subtle linguistic choices can tell us a lot about how candidates view their role as leaders.
Right.
And how they plan to govern.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're just getting started. This next source, 2.pdf, this one takes a bit of a different approach.
Okay.
It's not directly analyzing the debate itself.
Okay.
But it lays out some really thought-provoking questions
Oh, I like that.
that this foreign policy expert would ask the candidates.
I always appreciate when, someone is asking questions that really challenge the candidates to kind of move beyond their prepared talking points.
Yeah, and this expert's whole thing is that instead of those hypothetical situations or like these obscure policy details,
Right, get into the weeds.
Yeah, that we should be asking questions that reveal how they think.
Yes, because anyone can memorize facts and figures, right?
Right.
But truly understanding a candidate's decision-making process, that's what is far more valuable to voters.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so they have this really fascinating suggestion.
Okay.
They say we should be asking Trump about a past decision of Biden's that he actually agreed with.
Oh, interesting.
And vice versa.
Oh, I like that. Forcing them to step outside of their typical attack mode and actually engage with an opponent's perspective.
I'd love to see how they would handle that kind of curveball.
Right.
Because it would force them to think on their feet.
Yes.
And justify their positions in a whole new way.
It would certainly make for a more nuanced and insightful debate, I think.
Right.
It would force them to move beyond those kind of pre-prepared sound bites.
Yeah.
And really delve into the complexities of these issues.
Totally. Okay, so we've got these high-level analyses of communication styles.
Right.
And potential debate strategies.
Yes.
But let's get a little bit more on the ground here.
Okay, good idea.
Source3.pdf.
Okay.
This is from a student newspaper.
Great.
And it's about reactions to that September 10th debate.
Oh, cool. The student perspective is so crucial because they're the next generation of voters. So understanding how they perceive these candidates and their messages, I think, is really important.
Totally. And this article gives us a great snapshot of what people were talking about on campus after the debate.
Great.
The big issues were kind of what you'd expect.
Okay.
Immigration, climate change, Afghanistan.
Of course.
Gun control, fracking, the economy, the whole 9 yards.
The perennial hot-button issues.
Exactly.
Right.
But there were a few key moments that seemed to really get people fired up.
Like what?
Well, abortion, of course, was a major flashpoint.
Right.
Trump defending, overturning Roe v. Wade.
Right. Harris.
Criticizing, the recent wave of abortion bans.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, given how incredibly divisive that issue has become.
Oh, absolutely.
It evokes such strong emotions on both sides.
Yeah, for sure. And then they also touched on some major international crises.
Right.
Like the war in Ukraine and that recent conflict between Israel and Hamas.
Right, demonstrating the global stage that these candidates are vying to lead on.
Exactly. Okay, so in terms of who won the debate,
right,
this article seems to suggest that Harris might have edged out a victory.
Interesting.
At least according to some early polls.
Okay.
And just like the general sentiment on campus.
Got it. It'll be interesting to see if that perception holds true over the coming weeks.
Right.
Those early perceptions can definitely shift.
For sure.
As voters have more time to process.
Totally.
Read their options.
Oh, and there's one more little twist to this whole thing.
Oh, what's that?
Trump has already said that he won't debate Harris again.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He claims he already won, so why bother?
Well, that's a bold move, that's for sure.
It is.
It could be perceived as confidence.
Yeah.
Or maybe it is a way to control the narrative.
Oh, interesting.
Right. And deny Harris that opportunity to directly challenge him.
On a national stage?
Exactly, on a national stage. Because only time will tell how that strategy will actually play out.
It's like he's trying to rewrite the rules of the game?
He is. In many ways, he is. And it remains to be seen whether voters will reward those kinds of unorthodox tactics.
Right. Fascinating stuff. Okay, so we've got like this we versus I thing happening.
Right.
We've got this foreign policy expert urging us to think like outside the box a little bit.
Yeah.
And we've got a student body that is really buzzing about this whole debate.
Right.
So let's try to tie it all together.
Let's do.
You mentioned earlier how these little language choices can actually reveal a lot about a candidate and their approach to leadership.
Absolutely.
So what is it specifically about Harris's use of we that suggests a different style of leadership than Trump's more, I-centric approach?
Well, I think when you really think about it, the word we inherently implies this sense of collaboration.
Okay.
Right? Like a willingness to share credit and responsibility. It suggests a leader who really values consensus building and actively seeks input from others.
So it's less about I'm in charge.
Exactly.
And more about let's do this together.
Exactly. And you see this for example, when Harris talks about tackling climate change, she frames it as a challenge that we must face together, not as something she alone can solve. Right.
Which is a very different approach,
And that really contrasts with Trump's approach.
Yes.
Which seems to really emphasize his own individual ability to fix things.
Yes, absolutely.
He's the guy.
And that I really suggest a much more top-down approach.
Okay.
A leader who is very comfortable making decisions unilaterally.
Right.
And isn't afraid to go it alone.
He's going to do it his way or the highway.
Exactly. And we saw this, I think, if you look back at his economic policies during his previous administration, they were often enacted with very little input from, Congress experts in the field.
Right.
He saw a problem and he believed he was the one to fix it.
On his own terms.
On his own terms, exactly. So their word choices, you're saying, might actually offer clues into how they would govern.
Potentially, yes.
Like how they would approach decision-making if they were in the Oval Office.
Exactly. It's about more than just words, right?
Right.
It's about gaining insight into their fundamental beliefs.
Right.
About leadership, about governance.
Okay, now you just made me think about something.
Okay.
This whole idea that the foreign policy expert brought up.
Yeah.
About asking candidates.
Yes.
About decisions that their opponents made.
Yes.
That they actually agreed with.
Right.
What if we apply that same kind of thinking to their communication styles?
Oh, okay.
Do you think their language would shift at all if they were forced to like step outside of their usual talking points?
Oh, that's such an interesting thought experiment. Would Trump's, his very assertive I soften even a little bit?
Right.
If he had to articulate why he agreed with a decision made by Biden.
Right.
Could Harris maintain that kind of we-focused approach?
Right.
If she had to defend a policy championed by, someone like Trump, who has such a different leadership style?
It's like we're not just analyzing what they're saying. We're like analyzing their thought processes.
Exactly. In real time. And that's where I think it gets so fascinating because by paying such close attention to their language, to their tone, their body language even, we can start to understand, not just what they're saying, but how they think, how they process information, and ultimately, I think, how they might lead.
It's like we're putting together this big puzzle with all these little tiny pieces of information.
Yeah, yes, it's like a puzzle.
And we're trying to build a more complete picture of who these candidates really are.
Precisely. Now, I think it's also important to remember the power of narrative here.
Right, because it's not just about the individual words they use.
Right.
It's about how they weave those words into a compelling story.
Exactly.
A vision for the future.
Right.
That's really going to resonate with voters.
Exactly. And I think, Trump, for instance, he is really like a master of storytelling. He paints this very vivid picture of a past America that was, in his view, stronger, more respected on the world stage.
Right.
And he promises to restore that greatness.
Right.
Bring back the glory days.
Make America great again. Right. Yeah, and he does it with such conviction.
He does.
And such emotion.
Right.
He's not afraid of hyperbole and strong language.
No.
Which seems to, really connect.
It does.
With a certain segment of the electorate.
Right. It's a powerful narrative for people who feel like things have gone downhill,
Right.
Who long for a return to a time that they perceive as better.
Right. Okay, so what about Harris?
Well, I think her narrative is a bit different.
Okay.
It's more about progress, unity, about overcoming challenges.
Okay.
Shared challenges through collective action.
Right. It's a we again.
Exactly. She paints this picture of an America that is stronger together, not divided.
Right. And she uses much more measured language.
She does.
Right. It's less about raw emotion and more about logic and reason.
Right. Different style of storytelling.
Different approach.
For sure. But it clearly resonates with a different segment of the electorate.
So it seems like it all comes down to whose story resonates more.
Exactly.
Which vision of the future aligns more closely with, our own hopes and fears as voters.
Absolutely.
It's like they're both playing this high-stakes game of chess.
Right.
Using language to outmaneuver each other.
Absolutely.
And try to, capture the hearts and minds of voters.
It's a very strategic game. And, it's interesting because just like in chess, sometimes the most strategic moves are actually the ones you don't make.
Okay. You're going to have to explain that one.
Okay.
Because I'm all about, the big, bold moves.
Okay.
The verbal fireworks.
What do you mean the moves you don't make?
Well, we've been spending all this time, talking about the we versus I.
Right.
The power of these narratives, the persuasive language.
Getting people fired up.
Exactly. But what about the things that are left unsaid?
Okay.
The topics that they avoid.
Right.
The questions they dodge.
Okay.
The issues they just choose not to engage with.
Interesting.
Those silences, those can be incredibly telling.
That's a really interesting point. It's like we're so conditioned to focus on what is being said that we totally miss those glaring omissions.
Right, exactly. It's like the elephant in the room.
Yes.
And those silences, those very carefully chosen omissions, can actually reveal a lot about a candidate's, their priorities.
Yeah. Their weaknesses, their potential blind spots even.
So how can we learn to read between the lines?
That's the question.
What should we be listening for?
Well, I think you really want to pay close attention to the issues that are given really short shrift.
Okay.
The topics that are just kind of brushed aside or met with these vague platitudes.
Right. So it's not just what they're saying. Right. It's what they're not saying.
Exactly.